Welcome to our deep dive into the world of Web3 and AI. We've got a ton of information to cover about how to navigate these new technologies, but today we're going to zero in on one crucial element: due diligence.
Due diligence is kind of like that essential groundwork you need to lay before jumping headfirst into any Web3 project or AI product.
It's about making sure you've got a solid foundation of knowledge before you commit any of your time, energy, or resources, right?
Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't buy a house without having it inspected first, would you?
Definitely not. So for this deep dive, we're going to be focusing on an article titled Due Diligence for Web3 and AI. Don't just dip your toes, dive in and do your homework.
And the article really emphasizes the importance of going beyond those quick Google searches or AI summaries. They can be helpful for a starting point, but
They don't really give you the full picture, do they?
no, they don't. For informed decision-making, you really need a much deeper, more critical approach. Due diligence is about uncovering those hidden risks and making those decisions based on solid research. So how do we move beyond those surface-level searches and build a more robust due diligence strategy? Where do we even begin?
Well, the article lays out a pretty comprehensive framework, outlining some key areas you need to investigate. One of the most important and often overlooked is what they call the people-first principle.
Now, that's interesting. I would have thought that in decentralized spaces like Web3 or with AI, where algorithms seem to be calling the shots, that the tech itself would be the primary focus.
It's a common misconception. While technology is definitely a critical piece of the puzzle, the people behind it are equally important.
So we can't forget the human element, even in these seemingly automated spaces.
Absolutely. Whether it's a DAO, a cryptocurrency token, or an AI-powered platform, you always have individuals driving its development and making those key decisions.
So vetting those people becomes extremely important.
It's paramount. The article makes a really powerful analogy. Researching the founders and developers should be as thorough as checking a restaurant's kitchen if you had a peanut allergy. That's a great way to put it. It's about ensuring your safety and well-being.
Great. You wouldn't just blindly trust a restaurant if you had a severe allergy. You'd want to know everything about their hygiene practices, ingredient sourcing, the whole 9 yards.
So we should apply that same meticulousness when we're venturing into these Web3 and AI spaces.
Exactly. Investigate the team's track record. Have they been involved in successful projects before? Do they have a history of being transparent and accountable? And look for any red flags. Things like multiple failed projects, lawsuits, maybe even sudden departures from previous companies. These can be indicators of potential risks.
Makes perfect sense. So people first, that's our starting point. But what about the technology itself? I'll admit, I'm not a coder by any stretch. Does that mean I'm at a disadvantage when it comes to due diligence?
Not necessarily. You don't need to be a tech whiz to conduct effective due diligence, but you do need to have a grasp of the fundamental technical aspects.
So where do we start if we're not coders ourselves?
Start by trying to understand whether the project's code is open source.
Open source.
Yeah, it means the code is publicly available for anyone to see and inspect. This kind of transparency allows independent developers and security experts to really scrutinize the code.
They can check for any potential vulnerabilities or flaws.
Exactly. It adds a layer of accountability.
It allows for that community-driven scrutiny.
Exactly. And another crucial question to ask is whether the code has been audited by reputable security firms.
Okay, what are code audits?
So these audits involve a thorough examination of the code base to identify any security vulnerabilities and ensure that the code is robust. They act as a safety net, potentially uncovering issues that could be exploited by hackers.
Could you maybe give us an example of a vulnerability that a code audit might uncover?
Sure. Let's take a smart contract, which is basically a self-executing contract written in code. One common vulnerability that we see is something called a reentrancy attack.
A reentrancy attack.
Yeah, this occurs when an attacker figures out a way to manipulate the smart contract, and they essentially trick it into repeatedly withdrawing funds before the contract has a chance to update its balance. And this could lead to some significant financial losses.
I see. So a code audit could catch that kind of vulnerability and prevent it from happening.
That's the goal. A good code audit would flag that issue and recommend ways to mitigate it.
That's incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
So even if we don't understand all the ins and outs of the code, we can still look for these signs of transparency and security measures.
Exactly. And if you're dealing with an AI project, you also need to understand who controls the AI model and how it actually works. is the model transparent? Meaning, can you understand and scrutinize its decision-making process?
That seems particularly important when AI is making those big decisions in areas like finance or healthcare.
Absolutely. You don't want a black box making those calls. The article also stresses the importance of those ethical and regulatory considerations, which is especially important because the rules of the game seem to be constantly changing in these fields.
It does feel like we're in the Wild West sometimes with Web3 and AI. Everything is moving so fast.
And what might be perfectly acceptable today could be a regulatory nightmare tomorrow. So due diligence involves not only understanding the current regulations, but also anticipating those potential shifts.
That sounds challenging. How can someone who isn't a legal expert keep up with all of that?
Well, it can be daunting. Start by researching the regulatory landscape in your jurisdiction and any other regions that might be relevant to the project.
So, for example, if a project is based in one country but plans to operate globally, we need to consider the regulations in all of those potential markets.
Exactly. There are specialized websites, legal databases, industry publications, and of course you can always consult with legal professionals who specialize in these areas.
So, staying informed, using the resources available, and seeking expert advice when needed are all key.
Definitely. Remember, failing to comply with regulations can lead to some pretty hefty financial penalties, legal issues, and damage to a project's reputation. It's a risk you just don't want to take lightly.
Now, let's move on to a really fascinating topic: algorithmic transparency and data integrity. I've always been curious, how does AI actually think? What's going on inside that black box?
It's a question we get a lot, especially as AI becomes more and more prevalent. Algorithmic transparency is all about understanding how those AI models reach their conclusions. It's about peeling back the layers and scrutinizing the data that feeds into that decision-making process.
So it's not just about the outcome, but also the process by which the AI arrived at that outcome.
Exactly. So we need to ask, where is that data coming from? Are those sources reputable? Is the data accurate, unbiased, representative of the real world? Because biased or inaccurate data can lead to those flawed AI systems that perpetuate inequalities and make unfair decisions.
So the origins and quality of the data are really what shape those AI thoughts.
Precisely. And we also need to be able to understand how the AI model processes that data, how it arrives at its conclusions.
Right, because if we can't understand the process, how can we trust the outcome?
Exactly. And this doesn't necessarily mean we all need to become coding experts, but we should at least try to grasp the basic principles of how that AI model operates.
So what are the potential consequences of using an AI model that's opaque or relies on biased data? Can you give us some real-world examples?
Well, imagine an AI-powered lending platform that's using biased data, right? That could lead to discriminatory lending practices.
Or an AI medical diagnosis tool that's been trained on a very limited data set.
That's a great example. It could potentially misdiagnose patients from underrepresented groups.
These examples really drive home the ethical implications of using AI and why transparency and fairness are absolutely crucial when we're developing and deploying these systems.
Algorithmic transparency and data integrity aren't just technical considerations. They are fundamental ethical principles that we need to address if we want to build trust and ensure responsible AI development.
I'm really starting to see that due diligence isn't just about protecting your own investment, it's about making sure that these powerful technologies are used ethically and responsibly.
Precisely. It's about being an informed participant in this technological landscape, asking those critical questions, and demanding transparency and accountability.
So we've covered the people behind the project, the technology itself, the ethical and regulatory considerations. What's next on our due diligence checklist?
Now we move into the world of security and code audits. Even with blockchain technology, which is often touted for its security, there are still vulnerabilities.
Nothing is foolproof, right?
All right. So how can we assess the security of these Web3 projects or AI systems, especially given how sophisticated cyber attacks are becoming?
That's a great question. It seems like security threats are constantly evolving.
They are, and that's why those thorough code audits are so important.
So it's like having an inspector come in and check the structural integrity of a building before you buy it.
That's a good analogy. Code audits can really act as a safety net, helping us mitigate those risks and build trust in the project's security.
So what if a project claims to be secure, but hasn't undergone any independent code audits? Should that raise a red flag?
Absolutely. It's definitely cause for concern. While a project might have internal security measures in place, those independent audits provide an extra layer of scrutiny. They give us a more unbiased and comprehensive assessment of how robust the code really is.
So the absence of those audits could suggest a lack of transparency or maybe even a willingness to cut corners on security.
Exactly. And that could put users and their investments at risk.
It really reinforces the importance of looking for evidence and not relying solely on claims or marketing materials.
Precisely. Due diligence is all about verifying information, digging deeper, and forming your own conclusions based on the evidence.
Speaking of digging deeper, I'm curious about another aspect mentioned in the article, the community.
Ah, yes, the community and developer ecosystem, the heart and soul of many of these Web3 and AI projects.
I guess a vibrant community is kind of like a sign of a healthy ecosystem, right?
Exactly. A strong community often indicates a project's potential for long-term success. Would you rather invest in a company that has a passionate, engaged customer base or one that's struggling to gain any traction?
I see your point. A thriving community suggests a certain level of trust and enthusiasm.
And to assess a project's community, start by checking online forums, social media platforms, even developer communities.
What are some things we should be looking for?
Look for signs of activity, engagement. Are developers actively working on the project? Are people discussing it, offering feedback, contributing to its development?
So a community that's not just passively consuming, but actively participating.
Right, because a strong community can provide really valuable insights, support, and even helps a project adapt and improve over time.
I imagine a lack of activity or a lot of negative sentiment could be a warning sign.
Absolutely. If a project's community seems stagnant, if there's a lot of infighting or negativity, or if concerns are consistently dismissed, it could be a sign of trouble.
A healthy community should be open to feedback, right?
Yes, it should welcome feedback and address concerns, foster that constructive dialogue.
I'm starting to rethink how I approach these new technologies. It's less about being a technical expert and more about being an informed and discerning participant.
I think that's a fantastic takeaway. Due diligence is about empowering yourself to make those smarter decisions in a landscape that's constantly evolving.
It's about being proactive, asking questions, seeking out knowledge, and really engaging with the community.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. People, tech, ethics, data, security, and community. What's the final piece of the puzzle?
Risk management. The article really emphasizes knowing your limits, understanding the potential downsides. Web3 and AI both offer incredible opportunities, but there are inherent risks involved. Part of due diligence is being honest with yourself about how much you're willing to invest and potentially lose.
It sounds like we need a dose of realism here. The article has a great line. If something seems too good to be true, it likely is.
Words to live by. Due diligence is not about eliminating risk entirely. It's about making informed decisions and mitigating that risk as much as possible.
So before we get into those specific resources mentioned in the article, let's just quickly recap. We've explored the foundations of a smart due diligence strategy: vetting the team, understanding the tech, considering those ethical and regulatory issues, ensuring data integrity, prioritizing security, assessing the community, and of course, risk management.
We've covered a lot, but these are the essential elements that everyone, regardless of their technical expertise, should be thinking about when they approach these Web3 and AI projects.
Now, I'm really curious about those resources the article mentioned. What can you tell us about them?
Well, the article highlights 3 services that can be particularly valuable. The first one is Thomson Reuters Clear. This platform offers a wealth of information for due diligence investigations.
And it also mentions consulting with experienced lawyers or due diligence specialists.
Yes, those professionals can be invaluable, especially if you're dealing with more complex projects or significant investments.
This has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I've gone from wading in the shallow end to having a much deeper understanding of how to navigate these waters safely.
And remember, due diligence is an ongoing process. As you learn more and as these technologies evolve, your strategies will need to adapt as well.
Excellent point. So before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing is to approach Web3 and AI with a healthy dose of skepticism and a real commitment to thorough research. Don't let the excitement of these new technologies cloud your judgment.
Well said. We'll be back in part 2 to delve deeper into those specific due diligence resources and explore how they can help you make those informed decisions in this exciting but sometimes risky landscape. Welcome back to our deep dive into due diligence for Web3 and AI. In part 1, We laid out a comprehensive framework for approaching these technologies with caution, with insight.
We covered a lot of ground, didn't we? From vetting the team behind a project to understanding those technical aspects, the ethical implications, the regulatory landscape, data integrity, security, and
And of course, we talked about community dynamics.
right. And of course, that crucial element of risk management. Now I think it's time to shift our focus to those resources that can actually help you go even deeper in your due diligence journey.
Yeah, let's get practical.
The article highlights 3 services that can be particularly valuable. The first one is Thomson Reuters Clear.
Clear?
Yeah, this platform offers a wealth of information for due diligence investigation.
Okay, what kind of information can someone actually find on Clear?
Clear gives you access to billions of data points across a wide range of categories. We're talking legal records, business information, public records, you name it. It's a really powerful tool for uncovering potential red flags, verifying information about a project or company, and just gaining a comprehensive understanding of the entities involved.
So let's say I'm interested in a company that's developing a new Web3 platform. I could use Clear to investigate their history, right? Look for any past legal issues, financial troubles, anything that might raise a concern.
Exactly. You could also use it to research the backgrounds of the founders and key personnel.
Like a background check.
It is, kind of. It can help you identify patterns, connections, inconsistencies that might warrant further investigation. It's like having this comprehensive background check tool right at your fingertips.
That's awesome. What about the second resource, Nexus Diligence? How does that compare to Clear?
So Nexus Diligence is another comprehensive due diligence platform with similar capabilities to Clear. It aggregates data from a vast network of sources so users can conduct in-depth investigations, do risk assessments, all that good stuff.
Are there any key differences? Anything that sets Nexus Diligence apart from Clear? Like, what are its strengths?
Nexus Diligence is known for its global reach and its focus on compliance and regulatory matters. It really excels at providing insights into the legal and regulatory landscape surrounding a project, which is super valuable in a world where regulations can vary so much from place to place.
So if I'm worried about a project's compliance with, say, international data privacy laws or other regulations, Nexus Diligence would be a good resource to consult.
Absolutely. It can help you figure out the project's overall approach to compliance. Really critical information when you're trying to assess that long-term viability and the trustworthiness of a project.
Now, this third resource that's mentioned in the article is a little bit different. It's an AI prompt. It's specifically designed for due diligence background checks. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. This AI prompt is a tool for folks who are interested in leveraging AI for those quick preliminary checks. It provides a structured framework for querying an AI chatbot to gather some basic information about a person or a company.
Okay, so it's like having a digital research assistant to help you gather those initial pieces of information.
Sort of, but it's really crucial to remember that any results generated by AI should always be verified, cross-checked with other sources.
AI is a tool to help us, not to replace our own judgment.
Exactly. AI can be super powerful, but it's not infallible.
Right. These resources can be really helpful, but we need to use them responsibly and in conjunction with other methods of investigation.
Due diligence isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. You really have to tailor your approach depending on the specific project or technology you're looking into.
It's about using every tool at our disposal to help us make those informed decisions.
Exactly. Think of it like building a case. You're gathering evidence, forming your own conclusions.
This has been super helpful in demystifying these resources, but I'm curious, what about the mindset? What are some of those key principles or attitudes that are essential when we're approaching due diligence?
That's a great question. I'd say the most important principle is a healthy dose of skepticism. It's about questioning everything, not taking anything at face value, and demanding evidence.
It's so easy to get swept up in all the hype, especially with these new technologies.
It is, and that's why due diligence requires you to really be discerning, keep a critical eye on everything.
So it's not about passively absorbing information. It's about being an active participant, challenging assumptions, and really digging deeper to uncover the truth.
Exactly. Another crucial principle is patience. Due diligence takes time. Don't rush the process or feel pressured to make quick decisions.
It's better to be thorough than to make a hasty decision and regret it later.
100%. Rushing into decisions without proper due diligence can lead to some really costly mistakes. Take your time, be thorough, and don't be afraid to ask questions or seek clarification if something is unclear.
Ask questions, do your research, and be patient.
And lastly, I would say it's super important to seek diverse perspectives. Talk to people with different backgrounds, different areas of expertise, read articles from various sources. The more viewpoints you gather, the more well-rounded your understanding will be.
It sounds like due diligence is not just a set of tasks. It's a way of approaching the world. It's about being informed, making decisions responsibly, and engaging with these new technologies in a way that's beneficial for everyone.
That's a great way to sum it up. It's about being informed, being empowered, and being a responsible participant in the technological landscape.
This has been such an insightful exploration of due diligence resources and those underlying principles. In part 3 of our deep dive, we'll shift our focus to some real-world examples of how these principles can be applied, and we'll leave you with some final thoughts to guide you on your journey in this exciting world of Web3 and AI. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into due diligence for Web3 and AI. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From those core principles to the practical resources. Now let's bring it all together with some real-world examples and see how these principles can actually be applied in practice.
Let's say you come across this new decentralized finance DeFi project, and it's promising these incredibly high returns.
Ooh, high returns. That definitely catches my attention. But based on everything we've talked about, I'm already feeling a bit cautious.
And that's a good instinct. Remember that principle we discussed earlier. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Right, that was a good one.
Yeah, and this is a perfect example of where due diligence becomes absolutely crucial.
So if I were to encounter a DeFi project like this,
Yeah.
what would be my first steps in applying those due diligence principles? Where do I start?
Start with the people first principle. Go deep. Research the team behind the project. Who are the founders, the key personnel? What's their experience in DeFi? Have they been involved in any previous projects? And if so, what were the outcomes?
So it's kind of like a background check on the team, really getting a sense of their credibility and trustworthiness.
Exactly. You want to know who's at the helm, right?
Sure.
Do they have a track record of success? Integrity? And be on the lookout for any red flags, things like multiple failed projects, lawsuits, or a history of misleading investors. These are all potential indicators of risk.
Okay, so I've vetted the team. What's the next step?
Now we dive into the tech. Even if you're not a coder, you can still ask those critical questions. Is the code open source? Has the project undergone any independent security audits? Look for transparency, accountability, and evidence that they're taking security seriously.
And you mentioned smart contracts earlier. How do those factor into the due diligence process, especially for DeFi projects?
So smart contracts are basically the backbone of many of these DeFi projects. They're the ones automating those transactions. So it's really important to understand how those smart contracts work and whether they've been thoroughly audited for any security vulnerabilities. Any flaw in a smart contract could lead to significant losses.
So I need to understand how the smart contracts work and look for evidence that they've been audited for security.
Yes, exactly. You want to be confident that the underlying tech is sound and that they've taken steps to protect user funds.
Okay, what about regulations? We touched on that earlier. DeFi is such a new space and the regulations are constantly evolving, right? It can be a bit of a minefield.
Absolutely. You have to factor in those regulatory implications. Is the project compliant in the jurisdictions where it operates? And remember, DeFi regulations are changing all the time. So, staying informed is absolutely key. Failure to comply with regulations can have serious consequences: legal trouble, financial penalties, and damage to the project's reputation.
It sounds like we need to be really diligent in keeping up with those changes. It's not just about the tech, it's about the whole context in which the project operates.
Right, you need to look at the whole picture. That's what due diligence is all about.
Okay, so we've looked at the team, the tech, and the regulatory aspects. Anything else we need to consider?
Don't forget the community. What are people saying about the project? Are there active online forums, social media groups? A strong, engaged community can be a positive indicator.
It's a bit like checking the reviews before you buy something or try a new restaurant, right?
Exactly. Look for signs of a healthy community. Are there constructive discussions? Is the feedback thoughtful? Is the project team responsive to concerns? On the other hand, a community that's full of negativity, infighting, or unanswered concerns could be a warning sign.
It's like that old saying, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Exactly. If something feels off, it's worth investigating further.
So by applying these due diligence principles, we're not only protecting ourselves, but also contributing to a more transparent and accountable DeFi space overall, right?
I think that's a really important point. Due diligence is about more than just individual gain. It's about collective responsibility. By being diligent, we help create a more trustworthy, sustainable ecosystem for everyone.
This example has been super helpful. It's like we're putting all those pieces of the puzzle together, gathering info from all these different sources, and forming a clear picture before jumping in.
That's a great analogy. And remember, these principles can be applied to any Web3 or AI project you're considering.
Whether it's a new cryptocurrency, a DApp, an AI-powered tool, due diligence is essential.
It really is. It's how we navigate this new world responsibly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key message you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I'd say embrace that skepticism. Seek out knowledge, stay informed, and engage in critical thinking. And remember, the world of Web3 and AI is exciting. It's constantly evolving. So our approach to due diligence needs to evolve right along with it.
It's been fantastic having you guide us through this deep dive. I feel much more equipped to explore these technologies with a discerning and informed perspective.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep exploring, researching, and applying these principles as you navigate this exciting digital frontier.